This one comment that continues to reappear, no matter how many times I try to address it, deserves its own video, and the video is going to be about going beyond the black pill. So I'm just going to kind of run through what this audience is. This audience is, and it goes through these, meme titles of the blue pill, and this is your soy boy optimism. Everything is fine. Every year we'll get richer. Everything will be more peaceful. This is Francis Fukuyama. This is, the 90s with Bill Clinton. This is, the fall of the Soviet Union, the American superpower, Americanism. Technology is going to enable us to live forever, and we will explore the universe. This is sort of this centrist, moderate position. So someone can believe in this, and they can sort of be on the left, or they can sort of be on the right. It would be someone, maybe who lives in Washington, D.C., or someone who lives in an urban area. Or it could be someone who lives in a suburban or even a rural area. But this is someone who just sort of has a sanguine outlook, a positive outlook. Then you get to the red pill. And the red pill here, it's important to look at the colors. There's kind of a method behind the memes here. The blue is a placid, it's a tranquil color. It's calm. Red is an angry color. So the red pill, immediately there's a choleric pessimism, a fighting fanaticism. When people get the red pill, here's the statement I want to make. The world is crumbling. Civilization is on the edge of a cliff. We're heading toward collapse. If we don't use a kind of fanatical energy, almost a religious zeal, if we don't use that to seize power back from the elites, humanity will descend into an animal state and will never explore the stars. If I reread that statement to someone who is anti-Trump, never Trump, hashtag resist, hashtag persist, they'll say the world is crumbling because of Donald Trump. Civilization is collapsing because of racism. If we don't use fanaticism, the blue wave, to seize power away from the elites, the Koch brothers, humanity will descend into an animal state of bigotry and will never explore the stars, just like Neil deGrasse Tyson told us that we would. So there is a kind of social justice warrior attitude, social justice meaning the social justice of the left, but also the social justice of the right. Really, what we're talking about here is a psychological state that then seeks a narrative to adopt to already felt feelings. So if you're just angry at the world because you had a terrible childhood, you're more likely to be a social justice warrior, either meaning a alt-right person or someone who's, a Bernie bro or part of the Democratic Socialist Movement for America or something. You're going to get in this anger stage where you're angry about the world in general, and so you search for political narratives that already jive with your feelings. So you feel a certain way, and you're like, hey, this political narrative affirms everything that I already feel, so I'm going to latch onto that. Now I'm going to talk about what I would call the purple pill. So it's kind of a mixture of the blue pill, which is just this placid go along to get along, managerial attitude, a corporate culture attitude, and then you have the red pill, which is this rebellious, revolutionary attitude, and the mixture of the two is sort of a measured realism. And I use the term purple pill as a mixture of the two colors, but also signifying royalty. So this is an elitist, minoritarian perspective. So let's try to make a statement like this. Even if populist nationalism fails, we'll have Brazil, the Philippines, India, China, Russia. These are technically third world countries, but Duterte is making gains against drug trafficking. Bolsonaro in Brazil is making certain gains against crime. In China, you've got the nationalist communism that has been growing the economy. Putin in Russia, he still has very high popularity despite certain sanctions and problems in the economy. Still, there is sort of this hope for the future. So it's less than optimal, it's not a utopia, but it's not disaster, and we can survive within these systems. And maybe genetic engineering is going to come along, and it's going to surpass all the nationalist, ethno-nationalist, racialist. All the problems that people have today are going to be done away because they're just going to have like this consumer genetic engineering where a person of a middle income can go to a laboratory and their children, their genes are going to be selected for the best combination of the genes of the parents. And this is already covered. I think the film was Gattaca, was the film that was based on this premise. In any case, there's going to be winners and losers. Some people are going to win. Those are going to be the elites. Some people are going to lose. If you're a truck driver, if you work in education, you're going to lose because your job will be eliminated in the next 30 years. That's guaranteed. So when I read out this statement, and people can love it, they can hate it. I think it's a little more, again, I think it's a little more realistic than the red pill, which is, to me, just an emotional state of reaction. And that is an attitude of the mass man and the revolutionary. Now, that's an appropriate attitude if we were in a state of economic collapse. So if the year was 1929, I would say you're sort of an idiot if you're not a Nazi or a communist, because those are the only revolutionary ideologies. And if the economy is collapsing, then you have to be revolutionary. So it makes sense, but we're not in those conditions, so it doesn't really make sense from my perspective. And I think it's more just people believe what already jives with their emotional state. Now, what people accuse me of being is a black-pilled person. So the black pill is a melancholic pessimism. It's the idea, and this is, let me just read out this statement. The artificial intelligence is going to wipe out humanity. What's the point of doing anything if we're going to die someday? Might as well kill ourselves now. So that's basically what people accuse me of believing. So first of all, I have no reason to believe that artificial intelligence is going to wipe out humanity in the same way that, you know, humanity has not wiped out the chimpanzees or wiped out the bonobos or wiped out the gorillas. Now, of course, chimpanzees and bonobos and gorillas, their habitat is destroyed by human action, but it's not some kind of, you know, intentional, we're not like sadistically trying to eliminate them. And we don't view chimpanzees and gorillas and bonobos as our competitors on the earth. Even though we're related to them, we have a common ancestor, we don't have the intention of eliminating them. And in fact, we have some intentions of trying to preserve. Some people are environmentalists. They want to save these species. They want to save their habitats. So perhaps artificial intelligence will view us in the same ways. They'll say, well, you know, the human consciousness and human mind is like an interesting model, or you know, you have this concept of anti-fragility. You have a concept of like, even if you have a system which is superior 99.9% of the time, if you have a backup system that is maybe inferior 99.9% of the time, but 0.1% of the time it actually does some tasks better, then perhaps you have that, you know, system as a backup, just in case you have that system as backup. So I think I could conceive of a world in which there was an artificial intelligence, either an augmented humanity, a robotic system, whatever you want to conceive of it as, a genetically modified human species that looked upon the humans as we are today as a kind of backup or a fail-safe, or not a random number generator, but a system that could be used as a reference point. If we could say like, okay, well, we're going to make a calculation, but what do the humans say? In the same way that like humans still sometimes rely upon superstition, and I don't think that's necessarily a, how would I say this? Relying on things like astrology and superstition is not something that is so bad that it creates negative outcomes for people. Like people who read their astrological sign or whatever, it doesn't cause you to make horrible life decisions, but sometimes it affirms decisions you were already going to make. So I could imagine artificial intelligence being like, okay, we've already calculated that this is the best decision, but maybe we'll consult like the few remaining humans on the earth to see what they think about this question. So it's like an interesting, but again, I don't think there will be like a concentrated campaign to wipe out humanity. And then we get into the second part of the statement, which is, what's the point of doing anything if we will die someday? Now, again, that's a psychological state that people get into. I think the red-pilled people, they come in, they're hot, they're fiery, they're angry, and some of that is a product of being a, straight white male in the 21st century. You're left behind, you're socially isolated, there's a lot of feelings of hatred and dissatisfaction, and you come in and you want, some extreme far-right ideology that's going to come along as this religious fanaticism to save you from the black pill of daily life, because really the red pill is seen as a solution to the black pill. The black pill is like, I'm depressed, I'm anxious, I don't have friends, life is terrible. And so that's the day-to-day state of a depressed person. Then they see the red pill, they see radical politics as an escape hatch from their black-pilledness. So when they accuse me of being black-pilled, what I hear is, no, you're black-pilled, and when I state the facts of reality rather than your far-right fantasy, then that reminds you of how things really are, and you get sad. And so you sort of project your feelings of sadness onto me, and you say, oh, you're black-pilled. Well, I'm not black-pilled. I'm not coming out here with a video and being sad and morose and saying, oh, what's the point of doing anything? Why even bother making this video? We're all going to die someday. Might as well kill ourselves now. That's not what I'm saying. So people are misinterpreting, they're projecting their own feelings onto me. So what I want to say, there's something beyond the black pill, and it's not the red pill, it's not necessarily even the purple pill, but there is a conception of reality, and I'm not going to back up all these claims in this video. I'm just describing different stages of different thought processes, that reality is infinite. And so death, when you die, it's not an escape from reality. Reality doesn't disappear when we die. There's no great void. There's no great nothingness. Your identity is a composition of your experience and your genetics. Now, these change over time, the way that your genes express themselves and also your environment around you, it changes. And so you as a person change. And actually, a lot of people who I am confronted with, I'm not necessarily, I make these videos, you can choose to watch them, but people seek me out, they seek out my attention, they make comments on my videos, and they are so opposed to changing for the better. They want to be nihilistic, or they want to be stuck in their ways. They want to be angry. They want to be negative. And they don't want to change. And even if I explain things as they really are, they would rather stay stuck with an incoherent ideology. They would rather stay stuck in something that's false because that's familiar and it's scary to change. And I think this fear of change on some deep identitarian level is really a fear of death, because we understand that if we are to find, if I say I am in the alt-right, I am a right-wing person, and if you changed my ideas, if you changed my beliefs, then that would threaten who I am. That would actually kill me, because that's part of who I am. And the same thing for someone on the left. There's so many people I've talked to who are confirmed anti-racists, and I said, hey, well, what if, there is a correlation between race and IQ? Or what if, race is deeper than skin color? Or what if race has to do with concepts of aesthetics and metaphysics and philosophy, and that whiteness is not just all about violence and killing people, but whiteness is actually about the pursuit of truth above everything else, and that's something that distinguishes white people from other races across the earth on a historical level. Isn't there something significant to that? And I say things that, make them stop and think, because they've never heard it that way before, and they're still committed to their anti-racism as part of their identity. If I threatened their beliefs, their ideology, they would understand that in a sense that they have died. Literally, because if you are your experiences and your genetics, therefore you are then what those things compose, what those things bring forth, and so you are your ideology. If you change your ideology, you die. And people who are afraid of death, on an identitarian level, they don't want to. This is kind of like a Freudian Thanatos analysis, but essentially, these elements are fluid. And so you have to accept the tension between life and death. You're constantly dying and you're constantly being reborn in a very fluid, continuous, not a discrete fashion, but in a continuous fashion. And this satisfies the basic elements of reincarnation. So if I imagine what would it be like for me to be reincarnated, then what I would imagine is that I would die, my physical body would perish, but that somehow my brain, all the information in my brain, my genetics, my experience, somehow it would be put in the body of a newborn child. Now, a newborn child, of course, doesn't have any memory of a past life, and also, if I was to be reincarnated, it wouldn't be in the exact same genetics, the exact same environment, because if I was to be reincarnated, I would choose to have slightly better genetics and a slightly better environment. Still pretty much the same, but slightly different, slightly better. Because it would be boring to be reincarnated exactly as I am, exactly repeating everything, same genetics, same environment. And there would really, I mean, if you take like sort of a meta view of time itself, then that wouldn't be reincarnation at all. It would simply be, you're simply overlapping two events which are identical and therefore indistinguishable, and therefore we could say that I'm currently in this very moment an infinite reincarnation of myself, just, an infinite number of universes, the same exact person experiencing the same exact things with the same exact genetics. So that's obviously not what we mean when we talk about reincarnation, because that's tautological. What we mean is that there is a slight change in the initial inputs. Now, we already have that in this reality that we live in. We already have people who are very similar to ourselves in our genetics, and very similar in the environment, and yet slightly different. And we call these people brothers, we call these people sisters. You can mean that in a literal sense of siblings, but you can also mean it in the sense of like people who are part of your tribe, your in-group, whatever, genetically and ideologically. So reincarnation already exists in this reality to an extent. Now, if reality really truly is infinite, there are infinitely many worlds, infinitely many universes, then this reincarnation actually happens to an even greater degree than that which we could conceive of here on this planet. So if reincarnation really is happening, which I believe it is, on like a very basic, easy to prove level, and then on a higher, harder to prove level, then is there a possibility, and this is what I'm suggesting, this is what I'm putting forth, that our thoughts, our actions, basically the behavior of particles and individuals and souls in this universe have a ripple effect throughout other universes, these alternate realities, which are essentially the realities that you will be reincarnated into. When you die, you're going to be reincarnated somewhere else. You're going to be reincarnated into that reality. Now, how are you going to be reincarnated? Is everything going to be slightly better, slightly worse? What's going to determine that? And from my perspective, it makes sense, and again, it would be very difficult to prove in this video, but if it can even be proved at all. But my belief is essentially that your actions, your behavior in this life have a ripple effect throughout these infinite universes, and they determine what your reincarnation will be, how it will be. So if you spend your life neglecting others, so others need help, others are crying out to you and they're like, please help me, and you just neglect them and you pursue your own aims in a selfish way, you might be born into a household with neglectful parents. If, on the other hand, you love others unconditionally, no matter how downtrodden, no matter how irredeemable, you just love them unconditionally, in your reincarnation, maybe you'll have parents who love you unconditionally. If you choose to be an atheist and a materialist and depressed and suicidal and hopeless and blackpilled, you're going to be surrounded by that kind of negativity. Whereas on the other hand, if you spend your whole life as a revolutionary and a hot-blooded, like, right-wing extremist, then maybe those are the kinds of surroundings you'll have, these chaotic, angry surroundings. If you choose to treat others as you would like to be treated, then they'll be more likely to treat you that way. Not in this life, but in your reincarnation. It's basically karma, right? If you believe that death is this inescapable void, you're ignoring the fact that life is an inescapable infinite, that the two are always in tension. I don't know what else I have to say here in the notes. Sadism begets sadism. you're probably going to, whatever you do is going to have a ripple effect. And so if you spend your whole life trying to hurt other people as much as possible, and you kind of delight in that demonic kind of action where you're constantly trying to figure out new ways to make people suffer, and you think that's funny, which is like something that really is present in a lot of people, men and women. They like to see those who they don't like suffer. And most people have experienced this. Like, you don't like somebody because of whatever reason. Maybe they harmed you, maybe they harmed your friends, maybe they harmed someone innocent. For whatever reason, you don't like the person, and then you see them trip, or you see them mess up, or you see them, something bad happen to them, and you delight, you have that schadenfreude. Then if you take that basic instinct, the desire to see your enemies hurt, and you focus upon that, and you really concentrate upon it, and you make all of humanity your enemy, and you become misanthropic, then perhaps you will be even more that way in your next life. Perhaps you'll kick it up another notch, and maybe that's how serial killers are created. On the other hand, if you strive in this life to improve yourself, to better yourself, even if you start out in a very inferior position, like someone who's not very intelligent, not very skilled, not extroverted, you just have a lot of things against you. Physically, you're weak. So there are all these problems, but you try to work on all of them. Make yourself a little bit better. And in the course of 10, 20 years or something, you can look back and you say, you know what? I'm still not up to snuff. I'm not even mediocre. I'm not even as good as a normal average person. But I've strived to improve myself in every area. How I treat other people, how I treat myself. I've tried to improve everything. And you could die and say, like, well, I never really achieved my goal of being as good as I wanted to be. But then you've set yourself up, you have that inertia then in the next life to continue on that path. So I don't think death is really the end of our life's journey. I think we sort of continue in whatever direction we're already going. So if your goal is to become as revolutionary as possible, then just spend your life set and focused on pursuing that path. If you want to be as kind as possible, then you go in that direction. So there's like this infinite rise and fall, and there can be turning points, right? You could grow up, and in your early years, in your childhood, you could be really angry, you could be really negative, and then you sort of have a turning point, or something dramatic happens, you have sort of a revelation or an enlightenment or some kind of spiritual experience. You say, you know what, the direction I'm heading in is wrong, I need to change course and go back the other way. So I think that can happen. It can also happen that you have a good childhood and everything goes great, and then you have a traumatic experience, and that turns you into someone sadistic and negative. So it can go, I'm not saying it's just always in one direction, but there's this cosmology that's going on here that's beyond just the blue pill and the red pill and the purple pill, just being concerned with what's going on this world stage. Because yeah, if you are a materialist, if you don't believe in some form of reincarnation or afterlife, then it really is like, oh, well, why not just die now? I mean, I don't have a good materialist answer to that question. I don't think there's any materialist other than just kind of like a, hey man, well, let's just enjoy life while we have it sort of YOLO thing, which is very unsatisfactory. So I think you have to, at the end of the day, I mean, even if everything I said is unprovable, or even if it's false, even if you could prove that what I was saying is false, which I don't think you can, because I'm not making empirical claims necessarily, but even if you could, I mean, would you want to? I mean, do you really want to cling to your negativity so much that you're like, no, I'm the brutal, hardcore nihilist? And you meet these people, especially online now, because online platforms allow misanthropes and sadists and antisocial introverted people to have a bigger voice than they ever before had in society. Before, these people, how do you get ideas out there? Well, you have to get into the public space. You have to, talk to a publisher. You have to, get out on a bullhorn and get in the public square. Somehow you have to interact with other people. Now we have this like atomistic thing like YouTube, where any, nihilistic misanthrope can just throw out their ideas in comments or videos. And it's really enabled this kind of attitude, which I don't think is really helpful. I mean, again, from the materialist perspective, I think the best defense of life that they have is something like, YOLO, you only live once, why not just enjoy it? You're gonna die anyway, so why bother committing suicide? That's sort of a, like, why bother? Like, you're going to die. So nature has already taken care of that. You don't need to worry about killing yourself. Just say, like, hey, man, I can do anything that I set my mind to, or I have a range of possibilities, and perhaps there are things I could do that I didn't even know I could do. So let's just explore, let's just have fun with it. So if you have that attitude, then something like what I've outlined here, I don't think is that unreasonable. I mean, if we only have one life to live, why are you so focused on, like, being this hard-nosed, nihilistic realist, and you're like, I will never accept reincarnation because that's just fairy tales. I mean, you're just trying to sell me fairy tales to, like, make me a better person, and that's like, I'm so dark and Nietzschean and, like, isolated to myself, and I'm the anti-hero against the world. Is that really what you want to do? Or do you want to open your heart to maybe a better path? And again, I can't see how, like, a materialist could successfully argue against this, because, again, the materialist has to say, like, well, life is random, and we're all going to die, and nothing comes after that. But, like, why even bother commit suicide? Why not just enjoy? Why not just explore what life has to offer? And I would say, from a materialist perspective, you look at the human mind, and the human mind is a composite of many different parts that don't necessarily work in harmony. And so to get them to work in harmony, you have to make sort of compromises. Like, we have a rational mind, but then we also have an animalistic mind. Now, to make some kind of compromise between those two minds, you have to maybe embrace some kind of pre-rational or irrational or crazy spiritual out there kooky ideas to get your mind to work in sync. It's like, if you have something that doesn't really make sense and is not intuitive or has its own sort of weird logic, and then you have something that is very logical and reasonable and rational, you have to create, like, a GUI, like a graphic user interface, something that merges the two so that they can work in synchronicity rather than fighting each other all the time. And that's kind of how I see religion. What benefit does it do you to be, like, this hardcore materialist if, it doesn't help you get out of bed in the morning? Whereas someone who does kind of have these fantastical religious ideas that actually allows their, circadian rhythms to work in a better division of labor with their higher abstract functioning, and then they can just live life in a better way. I mean, from the purely materialist perspective, it seems like the human machine best runs on mysticism. Like, you need a little spice of mysticism in your life, and if you don't have that, it's a system, like, it is a software that the human hardware needs. And if you mess with that software, you take it away and you deny the human machine that kind of software, then the hardware doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work in the right way. That's the purely material. I mean, I've given already the spiritual kind of layout and the argument and whatever. But again, I don't see really what the materialist has to offer except, misery. So I don't want to offer people misery. I want to offer something beyond that, something better than that. You don't have to just be angry. You don't have to just be purely Machiavellian. You don't have to be black-pilled. There's something beyond that. That's what I view as the truth of things. And we all have feelings, right? Sometimes we get angry. Sometimes we get sad. And sometimes we're just kind of in a placid, go-with-the-flow, sanguine humor. The four humors, that's something the ancient Greeks recognized. But we have to, at the end of the day, sort of transcend our human emotions, because we know that emotion is deceptive, right? You can get into an emotion, and then that emotion drives your mind to create rationalizations, to create beliefs, to just confirm what you're already feeling. And it's a vicious cycle where, people who are sanguine will always say, well, I'm sure it will get better. when that's not realistic. Oh, well, I'm sure if we just elect Barack Obama, then we won't be racist anymore. Or, oh, well, that didn't work, so I don't know, maybe we just increase diversity, or like, oh, maybe we just be more intersectional, or, that plucky optimism is not really a solution. On some level, it is immoral, and it is ignorance of the truth and the reality. You're not helping people with that, and you're doing more harm than good. It's infantile, and that comes from this anger, which is self-confirming, which is not rationalistic. It's not a reasonable way to look at reality. And the Machiavellianism as well. I mean, Machiavellianism makes sense if you are Putin or Trump or Bolsonaro, or you're one of these figures. It makes sense to be Machiavellian. If you're a rich person, if you're a billionaire or even a millionaire, it makes sense to be like, hey, man, there's going to be winners, there's going to be losers, but we can survive. So it makes sense if you have agency and you have power. But if you're lonely and you're watching my YouTube videos, you probably don't have power. And so that Machiavellian attitude doesn't help you. It doesn't really help anyone unless you actually have the power to implement it. And of course, being blackpilled doesn't help anyone either. So you have to have something that motivates you to improve, and maybe someday you do obtain power and then you get to be purple-pilled and exercise that Machiavellianism. But I think basically the medieval Christian teaching is that some people are serfs and some people are shoemakers, and some people are craftsmen, and some people are merchants, and some people are knights, and some people are kings. Everyone has their station. That's also the Hindu conception of society. Everyone has their station, and you just do the best you can within your station. Maybe try to escape your station and transcend it. But, traditionally that's not really possible. Today, there is so much fluidity in the capitalist economy that anyone can be anything. It's also the case in communism. Anyone from any family can be anything. So, you want to discover your own limits. And I don't think that any being blue-pilled or red-pilled or purple-pilled or black-pilled, I don't think any of those pills help people ultimately discover their true potential and set them on the best course for their next life. I think you have to go beyond that, and I think you have to ask, what is your station in life? A real evaluation of who you are, and honest, because there's no benefit to being dishonest with yourself and like puffing yourself as better than you are. People talk about self-confidence as really the key to success, but it's not the key for improving yourself. Self-confidence is the key for conning other people to giving you power. So that's a very purple-pilled message. It just puff yourself up with as much self-confidence as possible, and people will listen to whatever you say, and then you'll have all this power and you can do whatever you want. But it's not going to improve you as a person and set yourself up for a better next life. It's just going to give you relative power over other people. So a certain level of self-confidence might be necessary in the case of you're trying to help people, and so you're trying to spread a message and you're trying to get people to listen to you. If you just come along all meek and humble, then you're probably not going to get a message out in a capitalist culture where everything is driven around self-confidence and salesmanship. So, but, when you're talking about improving yourself, you really do have to have an element of self-criticism. You do have to be real with yourself and harsh at points about who you are and what your faults are. Well, I am not good at this, or I'm not good at that, or I can improve at this. And there is like this Christian tradition, this European tradition, this self-reflection, this self-flagellation that's all about getting to the truth. This ego death, like die to yourself, bear your cross, put yourself up on the cross, like naked and bare for everyone to see, just brutally honest of like, this is who I am. And you don't have to do it publicly, but this is the traditional purpose of confession in the Catholic Church. Like you confess your sins. You say like, look, here are the things. I'm selfish and I'm greedy and I'm a liar and I do all these bad things. Now, how does that affect my relationships with other people? How have I wronged other people? How am I denying them really the duty that I have to them, which is to help them in this world? So you admit that, and then from there you say, like, what limited things can I do to improve myself? And that's mind, body, spirit, right? So, like, how are you treating your body? Do you have a diet of donuts? How are you treating your mind? Are you just a consumer of entertainment? Are you just a consumer of these sort of YouTube videos? You just watch it passively and you don't do anything about it. Or you just offer these empty criticisms because you've watched the video. There's some kind of impellation to action or a lack of impellation. This is the other hand of it. People just want me to tell them what to do. I don't know you. I can't tell you what to do. I'm not your captain. I'm not your keeper. You know, or you should strive to know yourself and what is best for you. What's your best course of action? You know, what your skills are, what your faults are. So you should know, you should be working on creating a plan for yourself to improve yourself. I don't have to give one to you, or I shouldn't. And I'm never going to be as good as you at understanding you unless you just lay your life bare to me. I don't think you're going to do that. You're just going to make a comment about how, well, what's your big plan, man? Like, tell us what to do. Oh, I guess you don't have a plan. You know, what's your plan to save Western civilization? Well, I'm not in power, so I don't have a duty to save Western civilization. The power I have is I have a democratic vote, and I've used that vote, and I think we all know how to use that vote, and I don't need to tell you which way to vote. We all know how to vote. Okay, so that, and again, starting a street fighting gang isn't going to work. Even the Proud Boys, who I looked at Gavin McKines and I said the alt-right, the alt-light, this whole big Trump movement, America First movement, it seems to be totally backwards and emotion driven, and there's no real goals, and it's pretty disgusting. But at least Gavin McKines isn't trying to get people doxxed. At least he's not trying to associate them with political extremism. At least he's doing something kind of moderate here. He's doing something kind of reasonable. So I appreciated that. But then looking back on all the interviews he did where he said, like, violence is golden. You always have to punch SJWs in the face. Like, he repeatedly, explicitly talks about how it's good to punch leftists. And now you're seeing his members are getting arrested, and who knows what's going to happen. But again, that emotion-driven strategy is not a good strategy. There has to be something that's like, you know, coming from the heart, and in terms of coming from a desire to do good, not just a desire to pursue whatever hot-blooded emotions boil up. So there has to be like a sense of... there has to be a meditation upon the good rather than just a reaction to evil. That's not the path to goodness, just being reactionary. So there has to be something other than street fighting, and in my conception, it has to be some kind of academic intellectual project. Now, around that nucleus, you could have a social club, because I think that is something people need. So people just need friends, and it's hard to trust people in a world of lies. I mean, when every other word out of someone's mouth is a lie, when the whole society that we've constructed, the civic religion around everything, is just so disgustingly deceitful, and everyone just goes along to get along, it's very hard to be honest with people and to trust people. Social trust is at an all-time low. Trust in institutions is at an all-time low. So how can you form genuine friendships? How can you form genuine bonds? How can you be part of a greater identity than just your individualism? How can you be part of an in-group when, you know, everything seems so deceitful? So I think that's an important question that we can work on. We can work on academics. We can work on religious questions. We can work on metaphysics. There's so much to work on, and I don't think street fighting is the way to do that. So, you know, Proud Boys, I think at this point we can say has been a failure. All the alt-right stuff that's been done, in my opinion, has been a failure. Now, maybe they start rejecting the street fighting stuff. Maybe they go in a different direction, and good on them if they change their tune and they stop being so red-pilled and they start being a little more purple-pilled or what have you. But you know, at this moment, there is a demand, there is a need for something constructive and creative, and not just consumptive. And there's a need for that, and it can only be fulfilled with your participation and you putting yourself out there and not just endlessly critiquing. Like, that's fine. Like, I certainly feel that I get better in my thinking. People critique me. That always helps me refine my thinking in a reactionary sort of way. But at the end of the day, you're not building anything if you don't have anything to offer. I mean, where people who critique, you just endlessly critique. You watch every single one of my videos and you endlessly critique. Out of what spirit? It is the spirit of covering up your own lack of production, your own lack of creativity, your own lack of building. You're just tearing down other people, and you always cover that up while saying, well, you think you're building something, but it's all worthless. Everything you say is immature, and everything you say is stupid, and, why should I ever offer up my own thought? Why should I ever put effort into educating other people who are so stupid? And it's a misanthropy. So where are your videos? Where are your contributions? Where is your desire to build people up rather than strike people down? Where is it? Where is your risk? I mean, people are willing to engage with this political extremism, right? People are willing to engage with like these extreme trollish memes and this rightist sadism. They're willing to engage with that in a fantasy land, the individualism where they can't get hurt, there's no threat, there's no risk. I mean, it takes risk to trust people to try to build something with other people, because whenever you tie your fortunes to those of others, there's always the risk that it could come crashing down and it's out of your hands. At least if you fail on your own, you only have yourself to blame. And that's a more controlled, familiar situation. Well, I failed, but at least I know it's my fault, and there's, it's all on me. Whereas if you're part of a group and the group fails, then that's something really scary, because now you've kind of staked your identity in something which is outside of your personal control. And for control freaks, that's a very scary thing to do. But if you want to be constructive, you have to do that. So you have to be collectivist. So again, Jordan Peterson's wrong. You can't just be an individualist. Everything out there is deeply flawed. We have to go beyond. Like, what we have now is not a good thing. So you can cling to something dead, or you can try to go beyond it, and that requires seeing things not just in terms of the news cycle or the election cycle of Donald Trump, but you have to see things in terms of decades. That requires some stability. That requires some clear thinking. That requires something other than just emotional reactionism, and that requires like a deeper theory of good and evil, and wisdom as the discernment of good and evil. So it has to be, again, on the scale of decades, if we're thinking about how do we create a life plan for ourselves that's going to bring us into a better next life. What is that thing going to be? Well, that's an academic project. Come do that if you're smart. And if you're not smart, then there's a lot of other things you could do socially to support this kind of a thing. Now, I try to make my videos intellectual to the extent that they're not needlessly intellectual and obfuscating the truth, but I at least want to have a high enough discourse so that I'm attracting people with whom I can interface. I mean, who is good at, what's the kind of personality that's good at reaching middle of the road, average IQ people? It's kind of like, I don't know, a football coach type person, someone who has that Rajasic body type. They're like quote-unquote natural-born leader, charismatic, whatever. They have that sort of type of personality where they can tell someone who's just sort of middle of the road, hey, this is what you should do, and then they'll be like, yeah, I don't understand the justification, but the leader said so, so we're just going to follow the leader. I think there's someone, I mean, there's obviously a lot of people who are good at doing that sort of thing, but then there's an academic sort of thing. So I think that is more what that's where my talents lie. That's what I'm sort of best at among my traits. So that's kind of what I'm pushing. It's not to say that someone couldn't start something like, and I think, it should be deeper than, we're not going to allow the current dogmas and religions to reign over us. We're going to be skeptical about atheism. We're going to be skeptical about materialism. What are the benefits of these ideologies? How do they benefit us? People can talk about how they, we went to the moon, or we had civilization. Well, okay, let's question the foundations of civilization. Let's question these sacred cows. And you can do it in a way that you can question the sacred cows on the right, you can question the sacred cows on the left. For me, you're left with basic human psychology. And basic human psychology is, in its essence, traditionalist, because our fear of Thanatos drives us toward the maintenance and preservation of our identity, which as a collectivist species is tied to nationalism and in-group preference. So in our basic human psychology, we need in-groups. That's a desire. Just as we need sex and food and everything, we need in-groups. So before I would, and you could call that identitarianism, but I'm not even promoting it. I'm not promoting identity. I'm not saying we should have nationalism. I'm just saying we have a desire for nationalism. And if you don't somehow satisfy it, if you just ignore it and you try to repress it, then it's the same thing happens as if you just try to suppress sexuality. Now, if you try to suppress sexuality, you better have a very strong monogamous institution in place like the church and the state to enforce monogamy. But if you don't enforce monogamy on the one hand, if you don't have an executive enforcement of it, but you have a legislative, a media, a judicial kind of condemnation of sexuality, what you get is a very perverse and revolutionary situation where on the one hand, the church and the state and the judges, everyone is condemning sexual promiscuity, but there's no actual punishment for it. And so that creates a very unstable situation. Now, if you have the executive and the legislative and the judicial, they're on the same page, then fine, you can repress sexuality, you can have a working puritanical society, and that has existed in the past. The problem is when we, on the one hand, condemn something, we condemn sexuality, but we allow it to run rampant, which was basically the situation in America throughout the 20th century. In the roaring 20s, we said, hey, it's bad to have premarital sex, but everyone was having premarital sex, and that has only continued to the present day. And as that happens, as the divide between prescription and description divides ever more in society, there is a degrading, a crumbling of institutions, there's an alienation, there's an atomization. So we need to be on the same page with that. And it's the same case with nationalism. If people are condemning racism, sexism, nationalism, bigotry, if we condemn that as a society, which we do through the mainstream media and through government and through everything, but basically the argument of capitalism and the broken window is that you need crises like this, you need tensions. The question is, how far can we take this crisis? How far can we take this tension? And what is the damage done to people? So if you want to talk about helping people and being good to people, you have to reconcile the fact that we are fundamentally, in our psychology, our need for the preservation of identity leads to a desire for things like in-group. We have to reconcile ourselves to that and somehow deal with the question, deal with the problem, not just ignore it and condemn it. In the same way, we need to deal with sexuality. We can't just ignore it. If you just ignore sexuality completely and you don't have a way of suppressing it and you don't have a way of reconciling yourself to it, then it becomes a huge problem. And of course, Freud was one of the people who documented this, of the fact that people have huge sexual problems. I mean, this is a huge psychological problem. People have all kinds of sexual fetishes and things that dominate their lives and destroy them. This is something that is deeply linked with self-destructive behavior. So we have to confront it, and you can't just hide it under the blanket, which is basically what the mainstream has done with things like nationalism. So I'm saying let's confront it in an open way, and let's not just condemn these people in the same way. The left doesn't condemn, when trans people have a suicide rate of 60%, they don't say, oh, trans people are just psychotic, they're useless, I hope they kill themselves anyway. They don't say that. They say, oh, this is a problem, we need to help these people. When middle-aged white men have a higher and higher suicide rate every year, on the other hand, the left is acting hypocritically, although logically within, an identitarian tribal warfare. But in a greater sense, it's hypocritical to then say, oh, that's fine, I hope they kill themselves anyway because they're patriarchal, whatever. There's a problem with that needs to be addressed, and we can address that problem on multiple levels. We can address it on a metaphysical, religious, academic sense. We can study society in a sociological sense, anthropological sense. We can do all of that, and then kind of filtering down with that kind of very highfalutin core to an organization, you could have a kind of filtering down of okay, that's like the think tank, but then there's a broader organization with that as a stable core that then allows people to socially connect and to I mean, because you can be intellectual about it, but that's not going to reach all the people who need to be reached. And there's ways that you can reach people with non-intellectualism, with just like symbols and art. And I think if you have that strong metaphysical core, then you can start to do things like create art, create imagery, create branding, create narratives, create politics, and like support people. Like maybe you support Donald Trump, not because you're like an American nationalist, but because you recognize that Trump is a symptom of a bigger problem in society, and that we need to work through this problem through the political process. And part of that means like we have to engage with these ideas, and we can't just hide them in the way that the left wanted to vote for Obama because they thought then they had like this utopian idea that this would help racism disappear, when it in fact did the opposite. It brought it only more into the forefront of people's minds. And they didn't recognize that there was an ignorance behind it, and then there was the purple-pilled Machiavellianism. So there are many different levels to this, and you can operate on any level that you're suited to. And I think I'm suited to a certain level, and then other people are suited to different levels. But there is a huge superstructure that could be created. But again, I still think you have to start at the highest level and then filter your way down. You can't start at like, we're going to start with populist nationalism, which I think is a symptom of a greater psychological schema. And it's not the foundation of the psychological schema. Because I'm trying to focus on the abstract and the conscious and the logical, and seeing how can we reconcile that with like our traditional ancestral identitarian part of our brain, and how can we do it from that way rather than creating narratives as justifications for our emotional state, because I don't think we can rely on the emotional state to be successful in a decades-long struggle to be reincarnated as something better than we are now. I think that leads to sometimes it leads to success, sometimes it leads to failure. Again, if we were living in revolutionary times, if there's a Great Depression, if there's, the bombs go off, a nuclear war, whatever, then I would say, sure, embrace the revolutionary mindset, embrace your emotions, embrace your passions. That's not what we're living in. We're living in a time of great malaise. Like, the problem is not people starving in the streets, but people are starving spiritually, not materially. Which is kind of a novel, unique situation in history, in certain ways. But in other ways, you can look at, ancient Greece or ancient Rome. You can look at what the elites were subjected to and their mindset, and how that's similar to Weimar Germany in the present day. Like, you can form those connections because it's all just basic human psychology, which really hasn't changed a lot in its genetic origins over thousands of years. But in any case, I think that's a good place to end the video. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.